Hi, I'm Mike Giambattista. I'm the publisher of TheCustomer, and today I have the unique pleasure of conversing with two authors of a book that I've become fascinated by. Prince Ghuman, sitting in front of his shameless plug. The book is called Blindsight, right? And it's brilliant. It's fascinating. I don't want to overstate it, but I'm in danger of it because I'm really enjoying reading it. And his co-author, Matt Johnson, who studies this stuff for a living. So Prince and Matt, I've done a terrible job of introducing you. Maybe you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves a little bit deeper and better.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us, Mike. So, Matt Johnson, I come from the academic neuroscience community. So I originally did my PhD in cognitive neuroscience. And for me, I've always been just driven by curiosity. And I've always been curious about why we do the things we do. The brain, I think, is the most interesting organ, the most interesting physical thing we could possibly study, because it is the nexus by which everything we could possibly experience takes place. And I've always been curious about what makes us tick. And so the best outlet for me was doing a PhD, and basically spent my mid-20s in labs and libraries, just getting as deep into this as possible. Got very, very, very myopic, got very, very specialized, studied some nuances of human memory and learning. And then I graduated, and I switched gears slightly in terms of studying the brain, in terms of how it generally takes in information and sort of how it interacts with the consumer world. So for me, my drive, my impetus for this field is really by curiosity. And I remember when I graduated my PhD, you get a actual hardcover edition of your senior thesis, which is about 120, 130 pages of very, very dense material. And at this juncture, I loved it. I poured, hours and hours and hours into it. I knew at that point that nobody, outside of my immediate family would read this thing. So when I did the ceremonious thing of putting it into this special place in the library, I took a $20 bill and I put it in my physical thesis. And I guarantee you it is still there today. Probably dropped a little bit in value for inflation, but the $20 is still there if anyone cares to look it up. And for me, that was just the perfect sort of distillation of my orientation. It's really not for, specific application. It's really driven to build on the cumulative wisdom of the field, which really contrasts, pretty, paradoxically with Prince's approach.
Well, just a quick note, and I want to hear Prince's story here, but, we don't often drop Easter eggs in the middle of our pieces here, but there you have one. If you can find the $20, it's yours.
Yeah, go to the Princeton Library and go grab it.
Right.
No, it's just so serendipitous. The whole time, Matt and I have been studying behavior. I call it consumer behavior. He called it human behavior, through two completely different lenses. So while Matt put it eloquently, lives and libraries is where he spent a long time, and I was on the other side of it. I was fortunate enough to be a marketing director early on in my career. And what I did was I read some abstract. I braved the abstract world. And as a practitioner, you just give me the nuggets that work, right?
Right.
Well, you gotta earn those nuggets. And I read as many abstracts as I could on a weekly basis. I read as many well-researched pop psych, PopNeuro books as I could, and was fortunate enough to read a book on a weekend. And on Monday, come up with some tests to test out, from user experience to messaging to what have you. And then by Friday, have some idea, some indication of success or failure, and to continue those tests. So I did that for a while. And I now was able to add neuroscience without the PhD, obviously, but completely tactic oriented, complete application oriented. And that's not to say I don't value what Matt does. I, in fact, tremendously value what academics do. I just think it's hiding behind scientific journals and in libraries with $20 bills in them, right? And I think when Matt and I got together, it was sort of like, the proverbial, peanut butter and jelly bromance immediately, because I had been putting stuff into tactic that he understood deeply, deeply, and vice versa. And I think maybe Matt, you'll agree with this, but subconsciously he was probably searching for, where do I put all this knowledge? Like, isn't there a place to apply this thing? There? Yeah. And
I feel your pain too. I come from the practical side of this, and if you're looking for real, genuine you know, the nuggets, not just the tips, but the how-tos, you know, give me some genuine insight. It's really, really hard to find credible sources out there.
It is.
And I think, and again, with the shameless plug, but I think that's one of the reasons I'm so glad that whatever serendipitous SEO thing happened to bring your site into our feeds, I'm glad it did, because it's, we've had a lot of interesting conversations just from the stuff that you guys have published here. And like I said before we started here, I'm literally like 20% the way through your book.
Well, I'm so excited for you to read the rest of it. It's, you know, like Matt and I will nerd out on hip hop sampling or Korean pop music, and then take a neuromarketing approach on why it's popular. And then we'll just write a blog about it. And I think we're so fortunate that we have that chemistry to actually do that. And one thing that's super important, I think this also applies to your listeners, Mike, and to what you do is, I don't know if you felt this, but I feel like there's a bit of a distrust almost between consumers and marketers, even though marketers want to create amazing products for consumers to consume and consumers want to fall in love with them. And I think that's part of the reason why we wrote Blindsight. We want consumers to appreciate all the work that goes into it, but we also want marketers to be aware that, you know, some of the stuff is a way to charm and actually earn a sale, and some of it may not be. And that's a big part of it. Is let's bridge that gap a bit, you know, because we can't live in a consumerless society. So all we can do is have a better relationship between marketing and consumers, whether that's through user experience, retail store experiences, or what have you. And that was the drive that pushed Matt and I forward into sort of revealing as much as we could, with research backed, like you said, but also making it digestible and not feel like a textbook.
Well, the book reads really fast. It wants me to keep going faster than I want to keep going, which is the fun thing, because I'm really just digging it a lot. So I think, for my background and for a lot of our readers, we're marketers. That's our perspective on life. And, you know, over the years, because I've been at this quite a while, I mean, the gray hair proves a couple of things, but, you know, there are manipulative tactics, and then and disingenuous tactics that probably have more to do with, you know, why you're deploying them in the first place. But to be able to understand, to have a real healthy, robust set of tools in your tool belt, I don't think could hurt any marketer. And what you do with them, again, that's probably a matter of ethics and morals. We can talk about that more at some other point. But I have a real, and I think that the readers share this, a real passion for trying to figure out, in this increasingly complexly defined customer relationships, how to manage them better. And trust, as you said, Prince, it's one of the core components of any customer relationship. And in fact, we've run surveys just recently, and they're corroborated by basically everybody, that consumer trust is at a historic low. You know, it may have something to do with our political climate, but it also, even if you remove that, it probably has a lot to do with the way marketers have just approached consumers. Like, I want to make that transaction, I want to maximize the value out of this, and then I want to walk home, you know, and get out of here. And so one of the reasons I guess I'm more passionate about what you guys are doing is that it exposes tactics that we're all susceptible to, and as marketers, we can all deploy if we understand them.
Yeah, and I agree. I think one of the things is a great example, right? I'll use memory as an example. Every marketer should know the foundations of the neuroscience of memory, because there are ways to actually use that to better connect with the consumer, right? Not get them hooked, none of that stuff. It's can you genuinely be more memorable to your consumer? Because as consumers, we want that. We want memorable brand experiences, right? So I think, I think, Matt, it would be great if you sort of gave everyone an overview of the neuroscience of memory, and we'll try to connect it.
Yeah, I mean, Prince is absolutely right that what we ultimately want is alignment. That in addition to the product aspect of it, the consumers want products, they also want amazing experiences. And they want to think of brands in particular ways. And so, in order for brands to do that, they really have to optimize for memory. And memory, when we sort of reflect on this just ourselves, it's one of those things about the human condition we just get so wrong. It's such an amazing thing that it's so central to our lives, and yet it's something that our intuition is so off about. So we think of memory as, when we're going through life, we have the record button on. And then when we are recalling an experience, we just have the replay button on, and it's just a faithful replay of that experience, or as much of it as you recorded. But it turns out that neither of those things are true. That really, when it comes to experience, there's things about the experience that are weighed more heavily in memory. And this is something we dive into a lot in the book, these specific things about an experience, which can, by the way, be designed for by marketers or experience designers or whomever else, which reliably lead to stronger impressions. So things like music. There's these fascinating case studies of people who are riddled with, sadly, dementia, and they are at the point where they don't know their own names, they don't know the names of their loved ones, but if somebody in that hospital room starts singing a song from that person's youth, they will just automatically have a smile come over their head, and they'll start singing it as well, because music just has such a hold on us, and it's so widely distributed in terms of how this is laid down in the brain. So everyone thinks, music and consumerism, or you're just talking about jingles, but there's so much more you can do than that. So that's one sort of bet that Prince and I have placed, that we're going to see a revival of sonic branding, because the visual space is obviously well known. Vision is such an important part of who we are as humans. A third of the cortex is dedicated to it, but that is saturated. Everyone has a logo, everyone has a branded color, this and that. It's much different when it comes to sound. It's pretty wide open. So that's one area where it's underutilized, I think, in terms of how these things can be used to design for impressions. We talked about things like friction, adding a little bit of friction into consumer experience. That is sort of this big no-no when it comes to UX. You want, really, really, really frictionless experience. You want to get people to the checkout, et cetera. And that's true for many instances, but if you're trying to lay down an impression, if you're trying to build a memory, then inserting just a little bit of friction in the right way can actually boost that memory. So we talk in the book about this specialized font called Sans Forgetica. And Sans Forgetica is this font which is engineered to be just a little bit difficult to read. You can definitely read it if you spend a bit of time, but you can't just see it in passing and pay minimal attention to it, and the words don't just come to mind readily. And studies have shown that if you print information in Sans Forgetica font versus like a Times Roman, then you actually remember it much more, because it forces you to strain your attention. So little things that creative experience designers can do to design an experience in a way, not just for the moment-to-moment experience, but for the impressions that it leaves. And I think neuroscience really has a strong role to play there.
So one of the first real concepts in your book is anchoring. And I'd love to hear you guys explain this from your standpoint. But as I understand it, and I grew up in the wine business, which makes me a little bit of a wine nerd, but it's my DNA, so I can't help it. But you abuse wine lovers handily. And I've since questioned everything I thought I knew about the appreciation of wine. So, you've ruined it. But having said that, maybe we can talk a little bit about the definitions and its utility in terms of marketing.
Ooh. All right, Matt, you go first. There's so much I want to say because you said wine, and I'm like fluttered. Go ahead, Matt. You go first.
Yeah. So firstly, diving into this topic of anchoring. So we don't experience absolutes. It's sort of a very general way of going about an experience in the world. We have a hard time with absolutes. If you get a test back on or score back on an exam you took and you got a 178, is that good? Is that bad? Is that an F? Is that an A grade? You have no idea. So you have to look for benchmarks. So you could look for your percentile in the class. Well, 178, maybe that's a 85th percentile. And you feel, yeah, maybe pretty good. It's sort of a B mark. Or maybe, the percentile is a 30, or the rest of the class all got 160s. We look for these benchmarks to give numbers meaning. And this is exactly what marketers do when it comes to pricing. So the same $20, so if anything's fungible in life, it's money, right? $20 is $20 and $20 in terms of its economic value as a purchasing power, but $20 doesn't always feel like $20 psychologically. So if, for example, you are checking out for a pair of jeans and the pair of jeans costs $60, that's your reference, that's your anchoring point. And then at the end of the transaction, say, oh, sorry, I forgot about this one tax. It's not actually on sale. It's going to be $80. That $20 extra feels pretty painful because you're anchoring it to $60. But imagine that same $20 and it's tacked onto a purchase of a F-150. So it's a $30,000 expense. And say, oh, sorry, it's a one little, it's a service fee or something like that. You don't even notice these things, right? It's a $30,000 purchase. What's another $20? But of course, $20 is $20, whether it's tapped onto a $30,000 purchase or a $60 purchase, but it doesn't feel that way psychologically. So it's one way in which anchors really has a huge impact on us as consumers, especially in the realm of pricing.
So if I may, I could, so over the past few days, it's hit me over several purchases that I've made and how I have been fully abused by marketers in the process by, I won't say falling for because it's not really that nefarious, but I will often, and now that I'm watching people around me, they will often pick the glass of wine or the level of quality of gas at the station or whatever it is based on their anchored highs and lows. It's fascinating stuff.
It is. And what comes out more is that the less you know about a particular, we'll say, product, the more you are going to be susceptible to anchoring, right? So I actually studied to be a somm, and so like even with that, you are so susceptible. Imagine if you don't know anything about wine, right? So just saying that it's Italian versus from Delaware, no offense to anyone from Delaware, but Italian wine is the anchor as opposed to the Delaware angle. And if you know nothing else, you're going to associate that, right? And when you don't have the region in there and you only have price, that's why there's all these repeated verified studies that show that higher priced wines taste better. Even if it's exact same bottle, exact same, and same thing with glasses. A red paper cup is a data point, is an anchor, right? So pricing is definitely one thing. And I think pricing, people, behavioral economics exposed our biases towards anchoring and prices a while back, and that's great. But there's other ways to anchor, and we sort of do it a lot. And it says a lot about our sense of perception, our sense of value, and ultimately does lead into attention. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And I think I should say for the record, I could keep talking about this stuff for hours, literally. I mean, and you two actually know what you're talking about, which is refreshing. It's not just me in a vacuum. And I would very much like to do that. But I think for now, this has been a great little conversation, and I'm looking forward to many more of them. So Prince Ghuman, Matt Johnson, thank you both for the book, for the blog, and let's do a little more shameless plugging. The blog is called PopNeuro.com. It's filled with fascinating anecdotes and stories. The book I'm just getting into is called Blindsight. You can find it on Amazon. I don't make any commission. I'm just recommending it because it's a great book. And thanks again for joining me. Looking forward to more of these.
Sounds great, Mike. Thanks so much for having us.